Bore da pawb. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the 19th Wales Flooding Conference 2021, Management and Resilience. I'm Gwyn, the Programme Manager of the Wales Coastal Monitoring Centre and Chair of today's session. This conference is organised by ICE Wales Cymru in partnership with the Chartered Institution of Water and Environment Management, supported by Welsh Government, Natural Resources Wales and Cardiff University, sponsored by Atkins, Waterco, Arup, JBA Consulting and Binnies. Yesterday we had session 1 on policy with a range of speakers. Today we have session 2, adapting to climate change. As you know, climate change is a multi-dimensional global problem endured at a local scale. With increasing temperatures, we're anticipating our flood and coastal erosion issues to increase, but at exactly what timescales is more difficult to predict. There are some things we can be certain of, like sea level will continue to rise, and climate change will need to be considered for decades and centuries to come. So how can we anticipate the risks we face from climate change, then make sure we work towards being prepared in Wales? One starting place could be the national strategy for CIWEM Welsh, which mentions adaptation 44 times. From a coastal perspective, the shoreline management policies complement national policy and set out the agreed options to sustainably manage our coast over the next 100 years. To quote the national strategy, the need to plan for coastal adaptation is particularly important in communities where SMP policies will change from holding the line to manage realignment or no active intervention. Some very delicate issues will be faced at national and local levels in the coming years, and supporting impacted communities will be imperative. Today we had planned 4 20-minute presentations, followed by a 20-minute Q&A session. Unfortunately, James Davies, the Drainage Manager at Neath Talbot County Borough Council, who was scheduled to speak about resource and capacity building, will not be able to present today. James is on the front line responding to a flooding event this morning. We have no further details, but wish them luck. We will therefore be running a reduced schedule and may finish a little earlier. For the audience, please can you post questions as you think of them during the presentations. This will increase the chance of me being able to prepare the questions for the speakers in the joint Q&A at the end. Your questions can be entered into the Q&A panel. If your question is targeted, can you please insert the name of the intended speaker? You can also like questions asked by others, which will increase the chance of that question being asked. If your question doesn't get asked, please take the speaker's details and email them separately or contact us to be put in touch. For the speakers, unfortunately, there's no traffic light system, so I apologise if I have to interrupt you to hurry up, but hopefully that's unlikely. You have a little bit of extra time this morning. So joining us today, we have Sam Wingfield, a Principal Analyst from JBA Consulting, who has been in CIWEM since 2004 and is currently managing many multidisciplinary coastal defence projects, whilst keeping involved with R&D on government CIWEM policy. Jointly presenting with Wayne Hope, Flood Risk Manager at Denbighshire County Council, who's had a wealth of experience working for local authorities and has developed a programme of fluvial and coastal schemes and continues his role as Chair of the Liverpool Bay Coastal Group. So Sam and Wayne will walk us through the East Rhyl Coastal Defence Scheme. Over to Sam and Wayne.
Good morning. Thanks for that introduction.
Yes, good morning, everybody. Thank you, Gwyn. Without further ado, we'll kick off. Thank you also to ICE Wales for offering myself and Sam the opportunity to talk about our East Rhyl Coastal Defence Scheme, which is a very exciting scheme and a very important scheme for Denbighshire and its residents. Next slide, please, Sam.
I'm just going to give a very brief introduction and then I'll hand over to the to your slides there, Wayne. Sorry about that.
I do apologise. You carry on.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll just if you could present the presentation there. Thank you, George. Yeah, so my name's Sam Wingfield, presenting with Wayne Hope. So we're going to talk about the scheme we've been involved with Balfour Beatty for around about 5 years now. We're going to be talking about how when a flood event happens, which Wayne is about to speak about, there's often quite a lot of momentum there to do some action on the ground, to get stuck in, to show you can make a difference and show that a scheme is being built. But we need to sort of focus and remember that the scheme is the means to delivering the ends, it's the means to delivering our end outcome and goals, and we need to stay benefits focused, outcome focused, rather than just sticking with one scheme. When we do that, we're able to adapt and adjust the scheme by evaluating the benefits it's delivering and changing the scheme so it fits the benefits. But in order to do that, it can be quite a challenge to communicate that to our financial partners, people who are joining in funding like Denbighshire Council and Welsh Government, and also to stakeholders and the public as well, as the scheme development might take a bit longer in that. So we need to have those attitudes and behaviours as a team in order to do that. So that's what we're going to cover this morning. And I'm going to hand over to Wayne now, who's going to cover the flood event on the ground as it happened in 2013.
Great, thanks, Sam. Yeah, sorry to jump ahead there. We should have rehearsed it a little bit better, shouldn't we? But right, okay. Next slide, please. Okay. Does the next slide come through?
Sam, you'll have to move the slide on.
Yep, I've moved the slides on.
Right, okay. Can you go back one, please, Sam? Sorry, you've skipped one.
Is that okay?
Yeah, I think there must be a slight delay. But okay, so the slide that everybody that you're looking at there is it's a screenshot from the Natural Resources Wales.
Sorry, Wayne, I think it's not coming through quite right. So, Sam,
Okay.
if you can cancel your screen share and then go back.
Does the technology let us down?
Or Sam's internet connection.
Apologies, is that okay now?
Yep. Let's hope so.
Okay, I can see that clearly. I hope everybody else can. So that's a screenshot of the NRW's flood warning on the 5th of December 2013. And as you can see there were lots of severe flood warnings, which it essentially means that property will flood. And the flood warnings were more or less accurate. There was a slight change of emphasis, I think, with hindsight in terms of where would flood, where wouldn't flood. But so next slide, please. So that was a photograph I think I took myself. So having seen that flood warning, I went as quickly as I could down to Rhyl, and the area that was forecast to be worst affected was actually West Rhyl. So as you can see there, a stormy picture, big waves overtopping the defences, and the waves being driven inland by strong onshore winds. The council actually took precautions and used a very simple method. We used sandbags to protect streets from flooding. There were around about 170 properties predicted to flood, and we prevented any flooding happening at the west end of Rhyl. But what the storm ended up being was there was a high astronomical tide, and superimposed on that was a 1 metre storm surge with storm force onshore winds. Next slide, please, Sam. And we have a video. So this was the east end of Rhyl. And this was probably, I don't know, half an hour, 20 minutes before the peak of the storm, before the peak tide level. But as you can see there, there's water coming over the defences and already starting to affect property. And that was a short time afterwards, and pictures paint 1,000 words, and that one speaks for itself. You can see cars there that an hour earlier were in the dry, and the properties on the right hand side were raised, elevated. They're built quite recently, were elevated above the flood area, so they escaped. But it gives a picture of the impact of the flood. Next slide, please, Sam. And that picture, I'll let you sort of dwell on that and have a look at that and take it all in. So you've got the Fire and Rescue Service there already in action. up to their waists, and you've got an enormous wave crashing over the defences. So that the storm, in terms of overtopping, lasted for around about 20 minutes, half an hour. In that slide again, the policewoman that you can see there, it's her first week on duty, and pardon the pun, she was in at the deep end. But just that picture, it tells a story. It gives a really good impression of how significant the flood event was. And there were approximately 150 properties flooded. I've used this photograph, which again I took myself on a number of occasions. I call these three gentlemen the three amigos, and that was about an hour after the flood. But they typify the spirit that we encountered amongst residents that were affected. True grit, I would say. And the residents have been very supportive of the council and everybody that's worked with us after the floods, which were almost 8 years ago. So that's the first bit of my presentation done, and over to Sam.
Thank you, Wayne. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about once we've had the flood event, how can we organise ourselves as a team in order to make things better for people, those on the ground who've been affected. Just going to show the next slide here. Fortunately, not as exciting as the other slides, a few arrows in there, words. But when we've had a flood event and we've seen that impact, Wayne and other risk management authorities are going to be under that pressure and that driver to deliver something on the ground, to show activity, to show that things are going to be improved and changed. And I put up here, there's two pathways we can approach that from flood event to delivery of a scheme. On the yellow here, we can stay scheme focus on delivering a scheme, which can be is ultimately what we'll end up doing. And then below here in blue is where a similar but different way of delivering things is where we stay goal focused. We stay focused on the outputs and the outcomes that we want to deliver. So just to summarise in the yellow pathway here, we've got this flood event. We've got a lot of activity and momentum, and we may end up committing to a scheme. This is a scheme that we believe is going to deliver the benefits to those people, but there's perhaps not a lot of time left in there to reevaluate those benefits as you go through from concept through to design, through to construction and post-construction. But perhaps a decision to focus on a scheme we believe is going to deliver that. As we may end up proceeding with that scheme, and even completing the scheme, completing it to time and budget, but we perhaps won't have that knowledge of whether those benefits are going to be delivered now and in the future. And especially with climate change and with the future unknowns that are going to happen, how do we know? How can we assess that those benefits are going to be delivered for not just the people living there right now who are affected, but people living there in even 50 to 100 years time? So that's perhaps more of a historical approach we've had, and I think most of us now will deliver schemes where we start off with a goal, we start off with a vision and objectives of outcomes, and we stay focused on those outcomes. So our goal, which we set from the start, could be, for example, reducing risk to people. And what comes after that is the means. The means is distinct from the goal in itself, but it's a way, it's an action, it's an enabling action for delivering those goals. So we keep that clear as we go through, and then we may come and identify a scheme that we think can deliver our objectives and deliver our benefits, and hopefully, that scheme we've decided or come upon perhaps at OBC level is the one we will deliver straight through to construction. It's a scheme that can go through and deliver what we set out to do. But unfortunately, that is often more likely than not the case. There are dark forces out there putting obstacles in our way, meaning our scheme often has to change. So if we know that our scheme has to change to fit the benefits, so we're not trying to bash this sort of square peg of a scheme into this round hole of benefits, we're letting the benefits lead, which means we have to leave time in our programming and our costs, in our project planning, to evaluate and change our scheme itself. This is where a lot of the technical work goes on. That we have to understand, looking at climate change, looking at some of the changes that happen. How can we evaluate? How can we make for sure that we're going to meet our benefits? So this is why we've got to leave time and program in there to do that. And that can end up extending the project, and we have to communicate that to others as well. But it's worthwhile. It's worthwhile because we focus on those end benefits, and when we complete the scheme, we can have confidence that we are going to deliver a scheme that's going to protect people and property and infrastructure in the long term, and now and in the future as well. So we may not see it straight away, you may not be appreciated straight away, but doing that technical work now is worthwhile, because there's a long list of projects, not just flood risk management projects, but across the board that haven't stayed benefits focused, or perhaps had their scope creep or focused in on an enabler itself rather than the benefits. And that can leave a legacy of failure that we don't want to be a part of. So just encourage you in this slide that the technical work that you're doing in the depths of the modelling or managing a project change is worthwhile for the long-term benefits of the people we're delivering for. It's going to move on now to looking at some of those practical obstacles we had to overcome in East Rhyl as we had to adapt the scheme, including adaptation to climate change guidance and measures there. So just some of those practical things we changed to and how we adapted to that. So just to start with, our preferred option at OBC level was an offshore breakwater. That's quite innovative, and it's something that's preferred economically, and it fitted all 5 cases of our business case. So we provided some outline design and costs that showed it would be a beneficial scheme. It would reduce wave overtopping into East Rhyl. So we're showing all that video of all the wave overtopping in this area here, filling this basin of Garford Road there. So we went for the offshore breakwater, but we had to provide some more analysis of that. So we did some sediment transport modelling to see what would happen there, and some more wave modelling as well to see if that scheme would deliver. Unfortunately, we found that the breakwater itself had to be pushed out a bit further out from splash point, had to be extended in length and width, and that was increasing the costs of that, making it economically and financially unviable. We also found that with the sediment transport modelling, with the beach recharge, and there was a build-up of sediment in this elbow here, which is called splash point, and that was creating a tombolo effect, and it was going to link in, the prediction was with the modelling, with the breakwater itself and create a tombolo, creating a feature that Denbighshire weren't really wanting to have at that time. So that option looked to be failing at that. So we did all the modelling, we did the detailed transport modelling, but we had to decide, we had to make a change, we had to scrap the offshore breakwater and go for something else. So that meant reverting to our next best option in our OBC. This was a rock revetment, so work on the right on the frontage there, rock, a new wave wall, a new promenade as well. Again, we costed that, but we needed to model that again in a bit more detail, the same we did with the breakwater, to see if it would deliver. So just a video here, just showing example of some of our tube flow modelling here. So we had some quite complex detailed modelling we had to undertake. So wave transformation modelling, wave overtopping modelling, tube flow modelling as well. And this was showing that the scheme had to be adjusted. We had to, if we wanted to meet our benefits, wanted to deliver on what we said we'd set out to do, we had to increase the length of the breakwater. We also had to add some raising walls in the golf course area here, where there's some residual overtopping in the future. We want to be able to store that and increase the standard protection into the future as well. So we had to adjust the scheme in that way. Let me just skip back to the previous slide a second. Unfortunately, the computational modelling, it wasn't going to be good enough to give us that full confidence in the benefits. That's partly due to the frontage here with this bend or splash point, and the wave direction which were coming from the northeast in 2013. And as we're hitting this point here, it wasn't possible to get full confidence in the computational modelling that we could deliver those benefits. So we committed to undertaking a physical model. This wouldn't happen for every coastal scheme, but it was felt important to plan that in, to plan that change in place, so we could have confidence in delivery of our benefits. So we teamed up, JBA and Denbighshire and Balfour Beatty, we teamed up with our JBA Pacific office in Brisbane, the team there who partnered with Queensland University to develop a physical model that we could try and give that full confidence now in delivering the benefits. So building that to scale model, as you can see here, generating the waves that were calculated at that computational level and representing that in the physical model, and also representing the scheme itself, as we'll see a little bit further on. The scheme itself, yeah, and the rock being placed there, having the ability to extend the rock as well. So as we're working with a team in Australia, we're able to ask for changes to be made, and that those changes to be made overnight. It helped for efficiencies as well. But as we found is that our scheme had to be extended a bit further. We had to add more rock to it, which meant increasing in the costs, and the financial case and the economic case was again being put at risk. And even a few more changes here we had to make as we go through it, which we allowed for. So climate change guidance, you know, we talk about adapting to climate change, but we also have to adapt to changing climate change guidance, which there's a few sure things in life, and that is that the guidance will change within your scheme. And it did within ours, and it showed sea level rises were greater than originally predicted. So we had to make a decision, were we going to take a precautionary approach, put all that protection in now, or we're going to take an adaptive approach and look to deliver a scheme that was actually affordable, that was deliverable, and had the ability to adapt and add to in the future. So we took that decision in order to be able to actually deliver a scheme to start with. Also, because we were developing some storage behind the overtopping as well to add that extra protection in the future, we had to comply with the Reservoir Act, and it was important to do that to meet those extra design standards. So we were able to put those standards in the construction that's been undertaken now, so we've got confidence in them as well. And finally, we had to make a few adjustments to account for the environment. It's quite a sensitive environmental area, especially with the sediment recharge and the impact downstream or down drift to the east as well. So there's some of the changes we had to make and the reasons for them and reasons why I had to plan them in. I'm just going to hand over to Wayne, who's going to talk about how we functioned as a team and we were able to adapt to those changes. So over to you, Wayne.
Great, thanks, Sam. So one of the things that became immediately apparent after the storm and after the flood was that we needed to do something, and the wave modelling that was carried out to understand the nature of the event showed that in some locations there was only around about a 1 in 30 standard of protection, as opposed to what we would have hoped for, which would be somewhere around a 1 in 200 standard protection. So there was an absolute urgent need for a scheme to reassure residents, obviously, but to prevent or significantly reduce the risk of a repeat event. So the council had and still has limited resources to deliver a scheme of this nature. So I looked for a delivery option that certainly focused on early contractor involvement, and I became aware of the SCAPE framework. So after much research and presentations from Balfour Beatty and SCAPE, that was the procurement route that we decided to go down. Next slide, please. So one of the benefits of that procurement route was that I was able to develop a team approach, working with Balfour Beatty as the contractor and with JBA as the designer and consultant. So what that meant in practice was that any potential issues that arose, so Sam has talked about the changes to the design that became necessary and apparent, that we're able to manage those. They were communicated early, and we could resolve matters before issues became a crisis. So it's been for the council, it's been a very effective way of delivering the project, and I would say that overall, I know we'll come to a slide later on of what is more or less the finished scheme, but it's been a very successful approach. Next slide, please. One of the key elements of the project was engaging with the public, particularly the people that have been affected by flooding. And it's interesting, you'll have seen what the ultimate solution was in terms of rock armour. And residents came up to me in the days after the flood event and said, why don't you just put some big rocks there? And yeah, whether through intuition, common sense, or whatever, they're actually quite right. But what you can see in the photograph there is some typical residents in terms of their kind of demographic. They're mostly elderly residents. You can see in the photograph as well, there was a sort of miniature version of the laboratory setup with a flume there to demonstrate to residents that rock armour works in practice to raise confidence with the residents. So that was a portable flume. And I have to say as well that we had 2 drop-in sessions and they were very, very well attended, and that was encouraging for us and the rest of the team. Next slide, please. I just want to talk through, and the next one, please, Sam. Just talk through the construction process. So as a solution involving significant quantities of rock armour, over 150,000 tonnes, we were keen to use local quarries. So that's one of 5 or 6 local quarries that we used for around about 50% of the rock that we needed. Next slide. But for a number of reasons, not least COVID and the coronavirus restrictions, we decided to look further afield. So there's a large super quarry on the west coast of Scotland at Glensander, and we had rock brought in to Ellesmere Port by barge and then transported by road to Rhyl, and that gave a lot of reassurance around supply, but also cost control, and that proved to be quite a decisive decision that was agreed by all parties, and was a great contribution to the success of the scheme. The rock had to be placed in tidal windows, so not necessarily during normal working hours, in fact quite rarely during normal working hours. The work took place very, very close to houses. It has to be noted that the residents were incredibly patient and understanding of all the disruption that they faced. They benefited from the scheme, but it was a lot of disruption while it was taking place. Next slide, please. As part of the scheme, we've been able to introduce improved beach access points, so that there's a net, other than flood risk, there's a net benefit from the scheme. And just some photographs now showing the scheme in construction. So this was around about a third of the way through the placement of the rock armour. And then the next slide is the scheme more or less complete. So you can see the rock armour revetment with a new promenade and a new raised sea defence wall. So that will provide a 1 in 200 standard protection for up to 80 years. And we've seen recently from some storms where there was a flood alert issued for the North Wales coast, and there wasn't any splash over of the new defences. And you could see that the scheme working as it should. And from my perspective as a client and as the county council, the scheme has been a great success. I think that's us done, isn't it, Sam?
That's right. Thank you very much. That's our presentation over. Thanks, Gwyn.
Thank you, Sam and Wayne. Your videos and photos really captured how devastating the flood event was, and in such a short space of time. It was interesting to see how much the design changed from OBC to the final implementation. So also thank you to those who've asked some questions already during the presentation. If I could encourage more questions to come through as we go along, that would be brilliant. Our next presenter will be Melissa Mahova-Snow, a project executive for Natural Resources Wales, who is very passionate about the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. His work has benefited thousands of people and the environment of Wales. Melissa will be talking about the Crindau Flood Risk Management Project. So over to you, Melissa.
Hello, can everybody hear me okay?
Yep, great, coming through.
Thank you. So good morning. This morning I'll be talking about the multi-million-pound flood risk management scheme that was completed in Newport earlier this year. You'll see from the slide that the project had one designer, JBA Consulting. Arup provided the ECC PM and site supervision support, and not only one but 3 contractors. Tell you more about that later on. Today I'm going to talk about a couple of the trials and how a good understanding of the community led to the triumphs of the project. I'm going to say the word challenging a lot, but what I really mean is nightmare, and parts of this presentation may feel like a story. So where is Crindau? The Crindau scheme is in Newport, South East Wales, adjacent to the River Usk. The top of the scheme starts near the Brynglas tunnels on the M4, and it winds its way through industrial estates, through Sharespree Park, and finishes by the former Sainsbury's site near the London to Cardiff railway line. It's 2.6 kilometres long. Sharespree Ward is a socially vulnerable area, mostly residential, light industry, includes a primary school, a community centre and some shops. The community is very deprived. Parts of it are very run down. It was common to see drug dealers and users in and around empty buildings. Fly tipping is extremely common. Crimes are frequent. It even affected us. Construction had to stop when the corner shop was being held up by an armed robber. The area of concern, the area has been a concern for the last 20 years for NRW. The low-lying area has flooded a number of times in the past. The whole area was considered in a multi-million-pound proposed regeneration project, which included a marina. These developments would have included better protection against flooding for the community, but unfortunately the project never went ahead. The image on the left shows the previous risk of flooding, with average flood depths greater than 600 mm. The image on the right shows the solution, a mixture of reinforced walls, sheet piling, and earth embankments. The scheme protects 660 properties from a 1 in 200 year event. The design also allows for climate change allowance to 2064, can be topped up in the future. The cost was 14.4 million and the total benefits are circa 85 million. I started the project in October 2013, a long time ago. So don't blame me if you're thinking, well, why did it take that long? Well, let me tell you about a couple of the challenges. Right from the start of the project, we knew one of the biggest risks through the industrial area was how are we actually going to construct for the middle of these operational businesses? NRW had never had to deal with this many industrial businesses before, since most of our schemes are located in fields and along people's back gardens. Adding to the challenge was the characters involved in running these businesses, such as scrap metal dealers, skip fixers, scaffolding companies, tyre companies, and a lorry park and a concrete builder. I will leave it to your imagination to conclude how easy it was to deal with them. One owner was already on our hostile database and certainly lived up to his reputation. Most of the businesses had yards full of equipment right up to the previous flood embankment, or used the areas for turning circles, deliveries, even built temporary storage units. Oh, and then there was the abandoned cars. I think you can see all those in the photos. So NRW had to provide a 10-metre working corridor for the contractors. We had to balance this against trying to minimise the impact on the operation of the business in order to keep the value of the compensation claims to a minimum. Sounds simple, doesn't it? But planning this without the contractor on board and probably a year in advance was very tricky, since most of the businesses were already working in tight spaces. We did start early discussions with each landowner. We did get early agreements in place. However, as soon as the land agents got involved, plans changed and more was expected from NRW. Let's look in detail at one particular tricky site. Here you can see one warehouse here that sits on top of the river bank edge. Due to the high erosion risk of the steep riverbanks here, we need to have our 5-metre offset with a piling alignment, which unfortunately meant piling right through the middle of this unit. The tenant working out of here is a social enterprise that collects recycled wood and provides training to adults with learning difficulties. So as you can imagine, it was very difficult to tell them that they could no longer operate from here. The landowner agreed to for us to refurbish another of his empty units for them to move into, since he wasn't keen on losing his long-standing tenant. It must be pointed out, however, that the state of the units were in very poor condition, and don't even get me started on the state of the electrics. So designs were developed by architects, and these works were included in the construction contract. However, when our first contractor, Galliford Try's subcontractors, visited the site to view the works and provide quotations, they had several concerns over the safe working methods. To address these concerns would have meant a significant cost increase, which we just couldn't justify. So we removed these works from Phase 1's construction contract. We started to look at alternative options, one being relocation off site, but we couldn't find anywhere. Either the leases were too long, or the landowner didn't want the untidy business there with lots of wood everywhere, or the condition of the property was in a poor state. Another option we looked at was a new build on the existing site, but the landowner just didn't want this because he didn't want to be liable for the increased business rates. We also looked at revisiting the defence alignment. We considered moving it out into the river, but what with the environmental issues and the buildability issues of piling next to the existing unit made costs eye-watering. So a year later, with a fresh look at the issue, we changed our approach. As an organisation, we want to collaborate with people and accommodate their needs and maintain a positive reputational image. But there just comes a point when we are constrained by the public purse. So in this case, we just couldn't justify the high expenditure. Therefore, regrettably, we had to serve our notice, statutory notice, giving the tenant sufficient time to find alternative premises. The tenant and the landowner worked together to refurbish another unit, approaching the health and safety issues in a totally different manner to NRW. I'll say no more on that. During this time, I was extremely anxious as we were in contract with our third contractor with a confirmed start date. Had the tenant not met the deadline, NRW would have had to pay for any delays. In the end, they were still moving the last bits out when our contractor started. So you probably think that's the end of the story, but no. So the photo here on the left shows the unit in question that needed to be demolished. Unfortunately, we had to demolish adjacent unit because they were structurally tied in together. Oh, and yeah, there's another thing. The neighbouring unit gable end wall had a massive crack in it, which had to be taken down and rebuilt. But here's the final works completed by Walters in Phase 2. Well, the story doesn't end there, I'm afraid. There was another area that we also had to exclude from Phase 1. In this particular situation, there were two business partners. Let's call them Mr. X and Mr. Y, each owning a parcel of land. Mr. X ran a business across both parcels of land. Mr. Y, a retired engineer, protested to the scheme from day one. He was fixated that his land would become worth a lot of money in the future when the regeneration plan was resurrected, and he thought NRW were trying to cash in. We did manage to make some progress with Mr. X, but when things took a turn for the worse when the land agent got involved, we struggled onwards, wading through all the lengthy emails and found the energy from somewhere to work with a very trying land agent. We offered compensatory land adjacent to their premises, recognising that the scheme did impact on a portion of their business area. This was rejected. They threatened to take us to judicial review and challenge our statutory notice under the Water Resources Act. In an attempt to reduce the adverse impact, we undertook a redesign to move the alignment further out. This would mean that there would not be any permanent reduction on their current yard. This alignment was also rejected. What they wanted from us was to move the alignment out into the channel by a significant amount. NRW did not view this as a feasible option. Several years later on, we were considering the following options: buying the two parcels of land, compulsory purchase order, and compulsory works order. I've been asked several times why we didn't use our CPO powers. Currently, that is not the preferred approach by NRW. If we follow the CPO route, we would still have to have showed that we try to resolve the problem amicably. We would also we could only acquire the land for the flood scheme, under CPO. On this particular site, this would have meant we still had to demolish the warehouse and agree the location of the rebuild. And we've also had to find them alternative premises during construction. CPO would have also involved preparing court papers to purchase the land, surveying, valuations, and could take up to 18 months if unchallenged, and up to 5 years if challenged. Knowing the characters involved, one could only assume that they would be challenging it. In the meantime, the community was still at risk of flooding, which was great concern to NRW. And if a severe flood warning was issued, NRW would need to deploy temporary defences. After a lot of consideration, NRW decided to buy the 2 parcels of land. The purchase was complete in 2019 with the support of independent surveyors. Alan Griffiths constructed this section of phase 2. There were so many trials on this project, and it seemed fitting that I talk about some trials that didn't actually take place on time. A risk we clearly identified in the appraisal stage was the difficulty around the number of services in Lynn Road Bridge. Historically, this was the only route into North Crindai, so every service is in this bridge. We appraised several options, but the preferred solution was to strengthen the parapet walls, which meant laying new foundations in the pavements, which affected several services. We clearly identified this as a big risk to the contractors due to the lead-in times to divert the services. We informed the contractor that they should carry out some investigation works, trial bits, as soon as they were awarded the contract. Despite these notifications, the contractor was so focused on other aspects of the project, investigations weren't carried out until the main works were due to start in this area. Well, we all had the shock of our lives when we saw the condition of the services. And not even that, some were totally unrecognisable. We weren't sure whose assets they were. So each of the service providers had to be called out. Weeks went on, that turned into months. We had to work with each of the providers since the assets were not fit for purpose and they needed to be upgraded. So is everybody worked out that the bridge had to be completely closed, and that, if you remember, this is the main access route into the community? But just to point out, there is an alternative route, but it's much longer. So we faced immense pressure from the council and the residents to open the bridge up again as soon as possible. But once we had opened this can of worms, so to speak, the best course of action was to actually continue on with upgrading the assets. In the end, the bridge was closed for over 20 weeks. We couldn't have been expected to have known about the condition of the services pre-construction, but if early investigations had been carried out earlier on in the programme, this would have allowed for better planning and identified a more focus was required on this section of the works. We may have been able to plan for shorter disruptions rather than one very long disruption. Here's some photos with all the ducting tidied up and arranged in a concrete house. Now, let's have a quick look at the gas pipe. First, noting that it's really not that far from the top of the road. Oh, and yeah, look what we found here, an unexpected sleeper underneath the pipe. We actually had to remove this and put our ducting pipes underneath. So as you can see, the whole section of works here turned out to be a complete nightmare with some serious financial implications to the contractor. NRW were quite lucky in only receiving a limited number of compensation claims from the local businesses. It could have been worse. Right, now let's go and talk about some of the triumphs and how we incorporated the feedback from the community into our scheme. I'm passionate about the Wellbeing and Future Generations Act, and I've highlighted in the top left some circles on the slides on how the project contributed towards some of the goals. In the appraisal stage of the project, we had several meetings with the community and Newport City Council. We also met the fire brigade, police, primary school and many other stakeholders to help us understand community priorities and needs. The team's vision was to bring as many benefits to the community as possible. To make space for the flood scheme, NRW purchased a land with derelict building on, which was an eyesore. The building was demolished after moving out drug-using squatters and picking up the needles. The wall was constructed and clad in blue pennant stone. This in itself has vastly improved the area. But we were keen to make the most of the acquired land. Residents told us they walk through this area to get to the local shops and to get to the primary school. Residents said this area was dark, vulnerable, and adjacent to the flyover where drug dealing would take place. The vision was to create an amenity area for the local community to enjoy. We wanted kids to have a bit of fun on their way to and from school. This green open space includes colourful trees, low maintenance shrubs such as lavender, periwinkles and grasses. It's got some block stones to sit on or climb on. It's got dragon's teeth seen on the bottom left photo. These were used instead of bollards. There's a mini children's fitness trail, colourful resin bounds, which the kids can run and jump along. I received so much positive feedback on this amenity area. It really lifts the area by getting rid of the derelict building, opening up the space, creating light, adding colour, wonderful plants, trees, and creating a fun place for the small children to explore. The top photo here shows Sharespree Park before our works. The residents told us the only way to the other side of the park was via a small, informal, often muddy footpath between the trees, to the right in this photo. Just here. The team's vision was to open up this entrance and create a formal footpath cycleway to join the cycleway along the River Usk. The residents would then be able to walk all the way through the park on the tarmac path, making it easier for parents with pushchairs to get to the children's playground. With agreement from the council, we demolished the unused toilet block and removed some of the trees and created new pathways and cycleways. This is now an active travel cycleway. We also extended our improvements to the cycleway over Lynn Road Bridge because this section was particularly tricky with the lorries turning at the T junction. The council also told us at weekends the park is used by the local football teams and for events such as fairs. With this knowledge, we were able to incorporate a seated terrace for spectators attending these local events into our flood embankment. The council have stated that these terraces have been well received, and in fact the council have decided to make this park a focus point for Women's Football League. Residents told us that the children's play park was an important community asset since they couldn't afford to take the kids on many outings. They didn't like the fact that there was no railings between the park and the river, and it felt unsafe. Our vision here was to make the area safer. We installed new railings, not only around the children's play park, but extended them down Pugsley Street, and we even installed a new easy to open gate. We also improved the safety matting around each piece of play equipment. We have given the park a new lease of life, and it will make it more usable for the community, whether they're walking the dog, cycling, or just watching a football game. It is not only important to understand the current community needs, but also understand the history of the community and the land. We knew in the past there was a large sweet factory levels, a bakery, a bus depot, landfill, and through our ground investigations, we were able to conclude that a lot of the area was built on made ground. Galliford Try decided to dig a trench along the entire piling alignment, which was very costly but worthwhile in the end due to the amount of obstructions found in the ground. The image here shows a small example of what was found, and I wish you could have smelt the hydrocarbons. This was a triumph because there was no delay to the specialist piling subcontractor. The cost would have been eye-watering if the piling subcontractor had been on stand down while the obstructions were cleared, roughly 1,500 per hour plus labour costs. We made sure this positive lesson was given to both contractors in phase 2. The top left image here shows the rubble found in this trench. The rubble was then crushed and used to form a foundation pad for the machines to sit on. To create the earth embankment, we reused material from Welsh Government's infrastructure project M4 Junction 28, a few miles down the road. By spending time in the community and liaising with the local police in particular, we were able to understand the vulnerability of the community. We worked on what aspects we could do to improve the safety of the area. We demolished 9 unsafe buildings. We have removed the dead end area under a flyover. We have improved lighting in dark, vulnerable areas. We have moved drug dealers and users out of the area by fencing off dark, secluded areas and knocking down the buildings. We regularly picked up needles. Our design included a security fence on top of the defence as well to protect businesses from theft, and this fence would also prevent fly tipping into the river. I only have time this morning to highlight a few triumphs, and also we delivered a lot more benefits, some of which included on this slide. I just wanted to mention one last benefit, which we didn't really fully appreciate its value at the start of the project. It was a massive impact, removing the ugly, dilapidated buildings and the walls on the urban landscape, especially around Lynn Road Bridge. Before, the area looked run down, dark and neglected. Now the area has opened up, looks fresher, brighter, and we hope is a further catalyst for future developments in the area. It's been a 7-year challenge with many hard things to face. I can't fit it all in 20 minutes presentations, but I'm proud of our perseverance to deliver a much needed flood scheme for the community of Newport. We embraced every opportunity to provide multiple social, environmental and community benefits to the residents. I would like to thank all those involved in delivering the scheme and to Welsh Government for funding the scheme and for their patience and understanding of this highly complex project. We have made a start towards making Wales what all we want to live in now and in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa. Many diverse challenges, each a sinkhole for your time. You seem to open a can of worms at every turn. Managing resources must have been very difficult. Though you can be proud realising the community amenity area, which looks amazing. You're a true champion of the Wellbeing and Future Generations Act. Thank you also to all those adding questions already. Some great questions coming in. So finally, Sinead Lynch, a chartered civil engineer and project manager at Arup, who manages the delivery of flood risk management and resilience schemes. She's recently been working with the Environment Agency to provide flood resilience along the Severn, jointly presenting with Paul Jones, who works with the Environment Agency and is a chartered civil engineer and fellow of the Institution of Civil Engineers. Paul works on flood mitigation schemes and has worked on development projects in Kuwait and Qatar. Together, they will present the Severn Valley Water Management Scheme. So over to you.
Thanks, Gwyn. Sorry.
Thank you. I see we don't personally need an introduction, so if I'll move on to slide 2. Thank you, Sinead. We'll start with just highlighting what we're going to talk about, who we are, the problem, the drivers and aspirations behind the Severn Valley Water Management Scheme, the catchment approach and the opportunities and the next steps. I'll emphasise at this stage, this scheme is in the very early stages. Ambitious though it is, we are right at the beginning. So we haven't got a finished product to show yet, but one day. Slide 2, please, Sinead. Right, who are we? Well, we are the Environment Agency. We're working with Arup, and we're working, who are supported by Jacobs on the Environment Agency Midlands Collaborative Delivery Framework. We're only part of the team, so next slide, please. The other parts of the team are, of course, the River Severn Partnership. Now, we're working under the umbrella of the River Severn Partnership. And the River Severn Partnership is was formed in 2019. It's a, how can I put it? And it's an arrangement between the Environment Agency and the Shrewsbury Council, who are both joint chairs. And it comprises a number of local authorities, enterprise partnerships. In fact, I think Natural Resources, I know Natural Resources Wales is part of that team. And their aim is to increase and improve the well-being within the Severn Valley. Just check all of that for you. So we'll be bringing together they bring together a number of local partners, and they cover the areas of the Severn, the Team, the Warwick Raven, and the Wye. Now we are further supported by a group of about 40 plus MPs under the direction or leadership of Daniel Kaczynski, the MP for Shrewsbury. These MPs represent constituencies along the Severn and into Wales. Okay, thank you, Sinead. The problem we've got is fairly obvious. Well, it is now after the recent highlighted news from the Environment Agency and Emma Howard-Boyd of the dangers of climate change. We are looking at a UK-wide problem of 6% increase in winter rainfall, summer rainfall dropping down by 15%, and river flows up by 20%, but while summer flows can be down at 82%, quite a thing to deal with. Now that's the UK picture, but in the Severn Valley, and these figures come from the River Severn Partnership, we have 47,000 residential properties and 9,500 properties at risk of fluvial flooding. Current land value is estimated to be in excess of 30 billion, and that's the land that is affected by or at risk of fluvial flooding. The average cost of flooding in the partnership area is estimated at 28 million per year. That's quite a saving if we can save that on year. Modelled river flows are expected to increase by 1 metre by 2100, with average forecast winter flows of reducing by 20–25% by 2050. This is the actual problem we're trying to deal with, and we're looking at a partnering approach to do this, and also take that beyond clearly different types of thinking that don't involve simply putting dams in everywhere. Next slide, please, Sinead. I actually got asked to put this slide in, or we were asked to put this slide in. It's not, as you all know, it's not a new problem. It's been going on for a while. It's just getting worse, and it's getting a lot worse. Some of the pictures here go back to the early part of the last century. The top right-hand corner is Melville. That was taken in 2020, and that is not an untypical picture of that part of the world now. Next slide, please, Sinead. Recent modelling gives us this result for Shrewsbury. For a 1 in 25 year event, the top picture shows the expected flooding, and this is kind of what has already happened in Shrewsbury earlier this year. The lower image shows the result of, or the anticipated result of, a 1 in 100 year event plus climate change in the centre of Shrewsbury, something that we want to avoid. And we haven't had a 1 in 100 year event yet in Shrewsbury. They'd be more like the 1 in 25 year events. Next slide, please, Sinead. So the drivers and aspirations that we're trying to work to in developing this scheme, and I'll emphasise again that we're at the early stages, and there have been points where people say we don't quite know what we're doing. We're looking at a package of measures that may one day mitigate flooding and address the issues of reduced water and water resilience in the area. But we are looking at flood risk to the communities within the upper and middle Severn, and we're looking to anticipate and with hope reduce peak flows at Welsh Bridge by 50%. That's Welsh Bridge in Shrewsbury. We want to mitigate the effects of climate change using sustainable solutions that will give us the opportunity to meet the carbon net zero target by 2030, and a 20% biodiversity increase across the area. Again, that's the aspiration. We'll also be seeking opportunities for water resilience. Now, to do this, that you might well imply that we're going to start sticking dams all over the place, or we're not, but there will be opportunities to capture water and reuse it, or use water that can be transferred across the country. Again, we're still in the early stages of developing those ideas. The farmers already do have problems with, in the summer, with a lack of water supply for irrigation. So water captured in the winter in some areas could be reused for this, and we have met with farming communities and representatives who said that they would be open to this kind of approach. We want to develop and utilise the River Severn Partnership to undertake and unlock wider benefits for all. That's using the organisations that are parties to the River Severn Partnership to develop opportunities, take on individual projects, and partly fund other projects to bring as a whole a scheme that will function and give wider benefits to the River Severn. And of course, ultimately, we have to drive a sustainable and economic growth. In doing that, that will have additional benefits, improve community health. There is a significant impact on mental health because of flooding. If we can reduce this, that'd be a huge benefit to the community and the wider area. Mental health is looked at as being a driver in terms of funding we can gain for the project. Okay, next slide, please, Sinead. I think this is where I hand over to Sinead, who will take on look at the more detail of what we're doing in the River Severn area.
Thanks, Paul. So yes, the first thing. Oh, sorry, Paul. Can I ask you to mute because I'm getting some feedback? Thank you. Yeah, I guess the question is, why are we looking at the Severn Uplands catchment rather than the full catchment? So there is allocation in this capital investment period to review the wider Severn flood strategy. However, over the past few years, both the Environment Agency and many other risk management authorities have commissioned lots of further studies into mitigating the impacts of flooding, especially in communities such as Shrewsbury, Ironbridge, which have been badly hit, especially over the last few years, and the damage and disruption that we're seeing by that increased flood risk is becoming more and more apparent. These studies, however, do appear to conclude the same thing, that essentially some of the localised capital schemes, whether they be small scale linear defences, flood walls, things like that, or larger scale, so large flood risk reservoirs protecting a larger area, they're not likely to be viable given the amount of water that we're dealing with. So while we are at the top of the catchment, this is a very large catchment, and there is a huge amount of water to deal with here. So with that from a financial perspective, but also the drive for looking at more sustainable options which work with nature, we wanted to look at and take a bit more of a catchment approach to how we're looking at things. So what happens in this particular catchment? As I said, we are at the top of the Severn catchment here. It won't just affect the local people and the biodiversity of the area, has the potential to impact the full Severn catchment. So what we're looking at the moment is producing a component of the overall catchment strategy for the Severn, but this will allow us to use the momentum of the Severn Partnership and the political backing that we've got through that MP caucus to push forward with identifying solutions as quickly as we can. So the Severn catchment upstream of Shrewsbury, which is shown here on the slide, is approximately 2,500 square kilometres. Approximately 2/3 of this sit across the border in Wales. So this presents really unique opportunity to work across the border and utilise that partnership and the bringing together of all those different parties to drive forward options which unlock wider benefits for place and people across the entire catchment. So the aim of our current strategy, which Paul mentioned earlier, is to look at identifying a basket of interventions which we believe will meet the needs and aspirations of everyone across the catchment, not just the Environment Agency. Noting the biodiversity net gain ambitions and the carbon net zero agenda, and the fact that nature-based solutions we know do unlock a huge number of benefits, we're trying to prioritise interventions which work with natural processes. So, for example, NFM interventions, things like large woody debris, runoff attenuation solutions, as well as large-scale implementation of regenerative and sustainable soil and land management practices, and land use change, so tree planting, river restoration, stage 0 restoration. These are all great. We know that these have a huge amount of benefits, but we do recognise the magnitude and complexity of the issues in this catchment, that more traditional or formal storage solutions for things like flood risk reservoirs, linear flood defences do play their part in the overall solution. So what we're trying to explore is a way of balancing the two and balancing the need to mitigate flood risk issue, especially in England, with options which unlock wider benefits and investment opportunities to support Welsh ambition. So kind of trying to balance the two, both from a technical perspective, but also from that wider benefit perspective. So how are we doing it? Due to the size of the catchment we're working with, we are adopting a data science approach. So we're using over 200 different open source data sets and digital tools to try and relatively quickly produce opportunity maps to determine what types of interventions might be suitable in different parts of the catchment. So on the right hand side here, so at the top, we've got for NFM and land use and land management interventions, we're actually applying a grid across the catchment with over 40,000 separate grid squares of 200 metres squared each, and running a set of queries across that grid and across different data sets, including land use type, topography, overland flow path, things like that, to understand what, if any, intervention might be suitable at a location. And for things like more formal reservoir opportunities, we're reviewing areas where the river valley narrows and selecting solutions which try and offer best efficiency in terms of height, width of structure, upstream contributing area and storage capacity, as well as reviewing different constraints, things like highways, railways, trunk lines. This is kind of building on work that has been done by the Environment Agency in the past around reservoir opportunities and understanding what those constraints are. So we're trying to take that a step further by applying another set of weighted constraints. There's a few examples here around landscape, which look at what might be most preferable for a given location. Again, trying to understand what those key risks to delivery are upfront and maximising the benefits we think that the solutions can offer. So that could be, for example, looking at hard constraints where legislation would prohibit an option. So, for example, presence of scheduled monuments or ancient woodland. To also looking at the other side of the scale where the opportunities are. So where, for example, if fish passage is an issue, could a river restoration type intervention offer those and unlock those further benefits? So this is then supported by storage assessments and high-level hydraulic modelling to better understand the magnitude of flood benefit that might be achievable and helping to weave that into our prioritisation. This looks at the sensitivity of options. So if we only get 40% uptake of the NFM interventions that are available, for example, or if we were to choose to only have 1 or 2 large storage interventions, trying to understand the sort of sensitivity and the scale of what we could achieve. So it's rather than selecting the preferred option. That's not the aim of the work we're trying to do at the moment. We know that we're at the start of a much longer process. But what this will allow us to do, hopefully, is to narrow down our focus, both in terms of geography and with types of interventions that we want to prioritise in future stages. So as we go forward, engage with communities, partners and landowners, that we've got something that sort of forms the basis of that discussion. So it is a high level assessment and we are very early in the process. And this type of approach isn't new. We know that opportunity mapping has been going on in this and other catchments for a long time. But what we're trying to do by looking at this large scale, landscape scale, using the digital tools and techniques, we're producing outputs at a resolution, which, as I said, help to inform those future discussions, but also within timescales that allows us to keep the scheme momentum. There's been a lot of public interest in the scheme, so keeping that momentum, keeping the discussion live, and ensuring that we don't lose that political interest that we've got through the partnership and through the MP caucus that's supporting us. So really where the next steps are. So as I said, we're looking at this component strategy. We're doing a lot of the technical analysis at that high level to inform discussions, and hopefully that will provide a framework to enable and inform the key steps that we're looking at. The first of those is around engagement. So we want to collect the local knowledge, concerns and opportunities on the ground and collaboratively develop this programme of works to make sure that we're bringing in the experience and the expertise of those who are hardest hit by these events. So through the National Flood Forum, we have established flood action groups across the English Seven, and we're exploring opportunities now to establish similar groups across the wider catchment. We're also what we're aiming to do is define a strategic programme and master plan with sort of initial output early 2022 that will allow for wider, more public engagement, as I said, starting to pull in the thoughts and ideas of others. We're working with the Seven Partnership to identify opportunities for funding and delivery across the catchment. So we've already secured funding to deliver what are termed demonstrator projects through the partnership, commencing in March 22, some of which are going to be across the border in Wales. And the aim for these is to provide an evidence base in how we can work together as a partnership and sort of develop enabling delivery models. So things like farm cluster engagement models, how can we best do that for a catchment at this scale? And looking at innovative and green finance models as well. Another part of what we're doing, and again, it's the start of a much longer process, is looking at that benefits analysis and the economic appraisal. So looking across it from lots of different angles, from different sectors and different interests through the Seven Partnership to support development of a funding strategy that works for this scheme, but also the wider programme across the catchment and across the partnership. All of this is the enabling work. This is stuff that we're starting to do, we're starting to develop, and this will underpin a lot of the work when we go forward into detailed investigations of the design, the appraisal, and understanding what that compelling business case is and what partnership opportunities we have. So with this in mind, as we've mentioned a few times, we are at that early stage, but we are hoping, and we have got ambitions to look at commencing delivery of this programme by 2027 in line with the current investment programme. On to you, Paul.
Thank you, Sinead. Yes, of course, we are asking the communities within the catchment, all 2,500 kilometres squared, to get involved as best they can. They can log onto our website. Soon be launching a crowd reporter app, which would be distributed via the National Flood Forum to allow people on the ground to report flooding incidents, what their thoughts are in terms of how flooding affects their communities and what they think can be done about it, complete with photographs and any text they wish to upload. It's a way for us to have more eyes on the ground and build a better data set of what's actually happening and what we have to deal with going forward. In which case that probably rounds up our presentation, I think, Sinead. Thank you very much. Diolch yn fawr.
Thank you, Sinead and Paul. Some unique challenges in the Seven catchment being spread across borders. Also great to see the underlying approach with a focus on natural process. I really enjoyed the presentations and gained an insight to all the schemes, especially the level of commitment from everyone to engage the community. So now for our Q&A discussion. I apologise to the audience if your question doesn't get asked to the presenters as mentioned before. Maybe you can contact them separately. We've had lots of comments to praise and support Melissa's work and lots of other great questions too. I've sorted the questions by the most liked and I'll work down the list. Keith, I'll stay in the public list if that's okay. Would you be kind enough to publish more questions as they come through? Let's have a look what we've got. So published questions sorted by most liked. So the first question's from Ruth Calloway. I think this is aimed at Sam and Wayne. Flood defences can be poor habitat for coastal and marine shore life. Did you consider eco-engineering interventions that promote biodiversity?
Do you want to take that one, Sam?
Well, I'll start with it, and then they were considered. There was some options for sort of drilling in the rock in order to allow sort of habitat to be created. And at construction stage, I think that was going to go ahead, but I have to hand over to you, Wayne, to see whether we integrate some of those eco interventions in at the time of construction.
We didn't, Sam, and the reason being that we were limited in terms of the time that we had available because there was an urgency to the scheme in particular, and also that there was a possibility that would add significant cost. But it's something that the council's worked recently with Aberystwyth University, looking at the retrofitting of ecological features. So basically holes drilled into our existing rock groins. And we could take the same approach once the scheme has settled down and bedded in. We could take the same approach. The problem we have, I suppose, with the rock armour is that because it's so high up the shore, it's only covered every so often. It isn't covered on every high tide, even only on spring tides. So, you know, we need to. It's something that we'll look at seriously, but it wasn't really a significant opportunity, I don't think, as part of this scheme. But it's not something that we completely ignored.
Thanks, Wayne. No, great answer. And there are lots of great retrofittable eco reefs that can be added these days as well.
Yeah.
So I'm not an expert. So next question. This looks like it's for Melissa from Kerry Evans. In relation to the thought processes of the adjacent landowners, is there merit in studying why people object to schemes that clearly benefit them? Is it simply money driven, or is there something else going on? The general public can be motivated to object to works that benefit them. Are there lessons learned from such occasionally nasty discussions?
Yes, thank you, Kerry, for writing that question down. I didn't think I could write an answer. I have to be a bit careful what I say here. But basically, I think having summed up or using your imagination to guess what the characters, I mean, I sort of call them rogues, and they are money-minded, most of them. And to be honest, just their priority wasn't the flood risk. They're just thinking about making money from the business. So even though they are benefiting, we just couldn't get it through to them. And I think there was only 2 businesses that were really supportive of the scheme, and those are the ones that had been flooded or had near misses. So most of them, 90% just weren't interested. And I think it links into another question someone had written about riparian ownership rights. But how do you just get these people interested when they're not thinking about the wider community? They don't care. They're sort of greedy and selfish. And I've particularly found that very hard working with those type of people. And the crazy thing was that no one objected at the planning stage. And even though we're having difficulties with certain landowners, they didn't object at that time. And I think you mentioned about the public. Actually, the residents of the area were really fully supportive of the scheme. Again, they, especially along Pugsy Street, they had a lot of near misses, so they were really supportive. So I think it was, that I don't know how to say, like, if they are greedy and illogical people, just how you can make sense of it. And if you had seen some of the emails that we had to deal with, it's just, I would say, nonsense. And I don't know how to say it in a nice way. That's why I couldn't write the answer down, I'm afraid.
Thank you, Melissa. There's some really challenging times. I can imagine it was very difficult. The next one with 8 likes is actually just a supportive comment. What an impressive project this is by NRW. Well done, Melissa and your team.
Thank you.
So the next question for Sam. Interesting presentation. Thanks. Could Sam expand on the relevance to the Reservoir Act for the coastal scheme, please?
Yes. So to allow for the full standard protection, we allow some residual overtopping to fill the golf course area behind, which is a golf course which had a bund surrounding it, which we decided to raise that bund and some future raising as well to contain the overtopping water to increase the standard protection. Because we're containing flood water for a period with an embankment to lower ground behind it, that would come under the Reservoir Act. In order to comply with that means extra design elements to comply with, I think, for the 1 in 10,000 year flood in order to make that safe. So we've had to work in order to make sure that design's safe and meeting to that standard. And it did require a bit of work, but it was worth getting it done and facing that problem and meeting all those issues in order to do that. But I don't know if Wayne, you want to add anything else on that, where that's covered?
Sam, I think you've covered everything there, and yeah, it's interesting that you know, the council over a number of years has been you know, tried to dispose of reservoirs, and yeah, but it serves a very, very useful purpose in providing that extra standard of protection.
Thanks, Wayne and Sam. Our next question is from Charlotte Ames, Severn Valley Water Management Scheme. Could you please explain how this strategy and basket of intervention measures work is being funded, and if this work links to the current first cycle or proposed River Severn flood risk management plan?
Shall I start off on this, Sinead, and we'll see where we go. How's it being funded? The studies we have at the moment have been funded via DEFRA and the EA to the tune of £10 million, and that will take us to development of a business case from which we then work on construction. In terms of the overall funding, we're also looking that projects will be funded individually by other organisations via grants, or they will choose to do it themselves, or we'll be engaging with landowners to undertake work on their land themselves, so land improvement, tree planting, work on NFM, etc. That could be, we're not sure how that's going to be funded work at the moment, as it may well come under the I think it's called ELMS, the new land management regulations that will come out from the government. That is still very much up in the air. In terms of overall funding, we can't give we haven't developed costs for the overall scheme yet, but each package could be funded individually and by a whole group of people, from local authorities to the EA to private individuals. Our task will be to try and coordinate that. Now, there was another part to that question, I think, if I'm correct.
How it links to the River Severn flood risk management plans, I think.
This is a component of the River Severn flood risk management plans. That is actually the link. It will just fall under the umbrella of that. We're dealing with the upper Severn. The overall flood risk management scheme covers the whole of the Severn, and this is a component of that.
Thanks, Paul. The next one is a comment, really, but it's worth mentioning because it got full light. Really interesting presentation regarding the Newport project. Project goes to show that even if we are thorough and accurate in our hydrology, modelling and engineering, there are untold challenges with community engagement and education, stakeholder cooperation, contractor performance, and historical or legacy impacts, all of which can scupper our best laid plans. So great outcome achieved in this case. Moving up, we've got one from Karen. Amazing presentation, Melissa. Just a question regarding planning. Was there any collaboration with the planning department, or any thoughts on the need for formal strategic planning processes and instruments in Wales, e.g. looking at potential opportunities for adaptation and land mobilisation?
Okay, thanks for that question. I've given a short answer, but no, we didn't really consider the adaption or land mobilisation in this area. I think the council had visions of, you know, redevelopment for the whole of that area anyway. So I guess they thought our flood scheme would be a catalyst for that. And then if people know the area, the old Sainsbury site as well, the whole area is sort of geared up for that. So that was their priority, really.
Thank you. Next question is from Kevin Lucas. I think this is aimed at Sam and Wayne. Did you achieve 1 in 200, including climate change, on the Rhyl scheme?
Go ahead, Sam.
Okay, we 1 in 200 year standard until 2070. That was the sort of the adaptive part of the scheme. And adapting the scheme is not just Yeah, just about the design adaptability is to make the scheme affordable as well, because of the extension of the scheme, we had to make sure that we could deliver a scheme that was economically viable and financially affordable as well. So we could provide that 1 in 200 year standard up until 2070, and further measures then would continue that protection into the longer term.
Great, thank you, Sam. The next question actually ties in, I think it's related. This is from Greg. How will the scheme be adapted in practice in the future? Was this just building in the capacity to raise the fence, or taking a different approach in the long term?
Yeah, it's raising the bunds we've developed initially in Rhyl golf course, and then we've got a proposed scheme out there which combine protection to prostatin, so it's significant higher bunds in sort of setting back a bund on the golf course there. So that would provide that protection in the future. I think the protection to East Rhyl and Garford Road area can be sustained in the long term to 100 years. You can provide that resilience of that community, because it's wave overtopping and not direct sort of sea level rise overtopping there. There's no sort of question of having to adapt that community, but you can maintain that development in there in the long term with protection. Was that about right, Wayne? Anything else you want to add?
No, I think you've covered it there, but I think the thing to bear in mind is that you know, whenever we carry out a review of flood risk in coastal areas, overtopping risk in particular, things change. So when the council, which we will inevitably do when we take a fresh look at this in say 20 years time, we'll have a much better understanding then probably of what the future might look like in terms of needing to adapt. But we could only go with the data and the information that we had at the time to come up with the scheme that we've got, which, as Sam says, protects the community for the next well, it's so about 2070, late 2070s, Sam. Yeah, so we'll review it periodically, but probably not in the immediate future.
Thanks, Sam and Wayne. The next question with likes is from Jenny Dixon, to Anonymous, asking about the CC allowances used in the new FMFP. For fluvial uplifts, these are based on the central estimate of CC for each of the 3 RBDs in Wales available at the time. These are 27 is in the Severn Estuary, 25% increase, West Wales 30% increase, and D 20% increase. For sea level rise, this was the single regional allowance of 1.1 metre was applied for a 100-year lifetime of development. Okay, I don't think that's any comments on that? No, that's okay. Thank you, Jenny, for the input. That's us for liked questions, so I can carry on working through and just start picking out some of the other questions. Another one for Sam and Wayne. Sam, you've answered this in the chat, but if you wouldn't mind answering it as well. This is from Charlotte Ames again. Great presentation, informative explanation of behavioural team approach and scheme delivery focused on benefits. Can I ask, did this East Coast Rural Defence scheme require a formal environmental impact assessment? Oh, sorry, my apologies. We have chatted about the environmental impact assessment. We've got one from John Evans. Will this initiative build on the wet washlands project looked at by the EA in the mid-2000s?
I think that one's probably for us. Yes, yeah. So the work we're doing is building on a huge amount of information, a huge amount of work done by the EA and others, so including the Upper Severn CABA group, to trying to understand, yes, while some of the technical challenges won't have changed, the physical constraints won't have changed significantly. We know that there is a different political setting now, there's different legislation, there's different drivers and ambitions behind what it is we're trying to do than just the technical anymore. So that has kind of unlocked opportunities to maybe tackle things in a different way, which is really quite exciting. So we are using all of that work that's been done previously.
Thanks, Liz.
And I could add to that, we are continually being reminded that all this work is stacking up there behind us. Are we not using it?
The next question's from Greg to Melissa. How much money was spent on compensation and adjusting the scheme due to landowner requirements? Was this covered by alternative funding? If not, why are we spending national EFSA money for the clear enhancement benefit of individuals who are actually responsible for the risk?
Hi, thanks, Greg. I can't give you an actual figure because some of the compensation claims are still ongoing. I think we worked with the landowners really early on we even pegged out the alignment of the piles and find out the operational needs and requirements. And we clearly stated this in the construction contract. And then during construction, the contractor was sort of communicating and working with the landowners a lot. So we were trying to minimise disturbance as much as possible, and therefore the compensation claims would be lower. So what was the other part of the question? Sorry, can you repeat the other bit, Gwen?
Yeah, sorry, it was on mute. The question was this so that where the funding came from, was this covered by alternative funding? And if not, why are we spending national EFSA money for the clear enhancement benefit to individuals who actually are responsible for the risk?
Well, I don't know if you can say the landowners are responsible for the risk. The funding came all from Welsh Government, and NRW has a statutory notice which we serve under the Water Resources Act, and it does offer compensation for sort of land loss or disturbance. They have to prove their loss, and that's just how it works really in practice, and that's throughout all our schemes, flood risk schemes.
Thanks, Melissa.
Thank you.
We've got a question from Mark King for Wing. Interesting that the computation modelling proved ineffective relative to the physical modelling, and you had to liaise with an offshore collaborator miles away. Would the option of digital twin technology of a shore with geological and flooding traits be viable in such a project, providing the data required to make conclusive intelligence? It allows you to go ahead with the works that you had to undertake. Or is it not considered an option?
Sorry, who's that a question for, Gwyn?
That's what it's targeted at yourself, Wayne, but obviously open to you or Sam.
I think I'm going to pass that one straight on to Sam, if that's okay.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure on all of that. I think the first thing to say, the computation model wasn't ineffective. It's sort of the physical model supplemented that, provided that extra level of detail we needed. In terms of having an offshore collaborator, the availability of large basins they are few and far between. I think we've proven now that we can do things digitally, and we had a JBA team there who were able to monitor and be on site and work with Queen's University on developing that physical model, which did provide that detail that we needed to confirm how much of the more rock we needed to extend there. In terms of the last part of that question, I'm not entirely sure, unfortunately, about with geological flooding traits. I'm not sure what that's referring to there, whether there is some other sort of technology out there where we can physically model. So whether you can fill that one in, Wayne, or not, I'll probably end my answer there.
No, it's not something it's whetted my appetite to look into that in more detail. So if the person asking that question could perhaps get in touch directly, we can have a chat about that. Sounds interesting.
Great. Yeah, thanks Wayne and Sam. I think we've gone through all the light questions and most of the other questions as well. It might be a time to conclude. We've had a longer than normal. Obviously, there'll be extra time from. So yeah, to conclude, we've had 3 great presentations from a range of organisations and topics on different geographic scales. We know climate change isn't restricted by political boundaries, nor is it forgiving to the poorest or least resilient communities. As a nation who chooses global responsibility, we've seen the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. These projects show how we can strive to role model coastal adaptation through understanding the risks and being prepared instead of reacting when it's too late, and engaging communities from the start. Don't forget, session 3 will be running tomorrow, working with water, which is hosting another great range of presenters and topics. Finally, thank you all for attending. Thank you to the speakers, Sam, Wayne, Melissa, Sinead and Paul, for giving their time and expertise. The event was recorded and will be made available to view in a week or so at the ICE website and CIWEM YouTube channel. Delegates will also be sent a link to an online questionnaire, which we would be very grateful if you complete. Hope you all found this a valuable event, so goodbye for today.
Great, thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.